What if I told you you've already died? It's not once, not metaphorically, but in ways so real, your mind couldn't even process it. You've lost identities, relationships, dreams. You've woken up from versions of yourself that no longer exist, and each time, a part of you dissolved. But no one told you it was a form of death, because in this world, we're taught to only fear the final one, treat death like a monster hiding at the end of a hallway. We don't want to. Walk down. We light candles. We write eulogies for the body, but we ignore the 1,000 tiny funerals we hold for our identity silently every day. But what if the real tragedy isn't death? What if the tragedy is not knowing you've already crossed the line, that you've already entered the in-between? There's a word for this space. It's not purgatory, not hell, not heaven. It's the Bardo, the ancient Tibetan name for the state between death and rebirth. And here's the twist. Nobody told you. You don't enter the Bardo. When your heart stops, you're in it right now. Every time something ends and something else hasn't begun, every time you lose what once defined you, every time you feel that strange, hollow silence inside, that's the Bardo whispering. But we don't listen. We scroll. We numb. We perform. Because the Bardo isn't comfortable. It's raw, unfiltered, exposing everything you've been trying to ignore. The only way out is through. This isn't a story about dying. It's a story about remembering, about learning, to recognize the illusion before it collapses. Because what no one tells you is this: the way you live determines how you die. And the way you die decides what comes next. But we'll get there. First, take a breath. Let everything you thought you knew about death fall away. Because this isn't a bedtime story. This is the instruction manual you were never given. And the first page starts not with a belief, but with a question. Who are you when there's nothing left to hold on to? If you're ready to explore that answer, you're not like most people. Most people will scroll past this. You didn't, so make sure you're subscribed and hit the bell, because the YouTube algorithm won't show you content like this unless you ask for it. Ready? Let's begin. Most people think death is a moment, a line you cross once and never come back from. But in ancient traditions, especially Tibetan Buddhism, death isn't a moment. It's a process, a journey, psychological and spiritual unfolding that begins long before your body stops breathing. And that journey happens inside what they call the Bardo. Now, the Bardo isn't some far-off mystical dimension. It's a space of transition, a place where what was no longer is, and what will be hasn't arrived yet. It's a realm where time bends, identity dissolves, and reality is shaped entirely by the contents of your own mind. And that's not a metaphor. In the Bardo, you don't see what's out there. You see what's inside you, amplified, reflected, unavoidable. That's why they say it's not a punishment. It's not a reward, it's a mirror. And here's where it gets personal. The Bardo doesn't start when you die. It starts when you become aware. When you stop living on autopilot. When you pause and realize you've been acting like a person instead of being one, that moment. When your job ends, or your relationship ends, or you look in the mirror and no longer recognize who you've become. That's a taste of the Bardo. And how you handle those moments, that's the training. Because the Bardo is not something you escape. It's something you navigate. And like any terrain, it helps to have a map, but more importantly, it helps to know how to read it. You see, this isn't about religion. It's not about beliefs or dogma. It's about awareness. Because awareness is what determines whether the Bardo becomes a nightmare or a liberation. If you resist what appears, if you cling to the illusion, if you chase the light or run from the dark, you get stuck. Not because someone's punishing you, but because you don't recognize what's real. That's why we're making this video. Not to scare you, not to sell you fantasies, but to prepare you. To show you that the same mental patterns that trap you in life will follow you into death unless you see through them. And that seeing that recognition starts now. Because if you understand that the Bardo is already here, then you realize this video isn't about death. It's about how you live. So let's dive deeper into what the Bardo really is, how it works, and what it means for the way you breathe. Think, love, and let go. But before we begin, what do you think? What if death isn't the opposite of life, but the opposite of attachment? Let me know in the comments. I read them all. Now let's enter the Bardo. Let's start with a question nobody asks. Why are we so afraid of death? Not the idea of pain, not the loss of others, but our own disappearance. Most people don't fear non-existence. They fear facing themselves, because deep down, we know that death doesn't erase the mind, it reveals it. The Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Bardo Thödol, teaches that when you die, you don't vanish. You dissolve into the raw, unfiltered awareness that's always been there. But without a body, without distractions, without stories, it's just you. And in that space, what appears isn't random. It's everything you've avoided, every fear you've buried, every craving you couldn't control, projected, personified, unavoidable. That's the first problem. We don't prepare for what's real. We prepare for fantasies, heavens, hells, rewards, punishments, all created to soothe us, not to wake us. But the Bardo doesn't play by our fantasies. It plays by our mind. It doesn't lie. Imagine this. You close your eyes for the last time, and suddenly you're floating. Strange sense of freedom, weightlessness. You're not scared at first, but then it begins. Flashes of light, shapes forming from nowhere. Beings, some terrifying, others blindingly beautiful, emerge before you. But they don't speak, they reflect. Now here's the kicker. They're not real. They're you. This is the Bardo's brutal honesty. It doesn't show you what's outside. It shows you what's unresolved inside. And if you're not prepared, it feels like madness. That's why most people lose clarity after death. Not because they're punished, but because they never trained for that level of intensity. We train for exams, for jobs, for retirement, but not for the one thing guaranteed to happen, the moment our story collapses. Let me make this clear. The Bardo isn't a metaphor. It's not a poetic way to comfort the dying. It's an instruction. Manual for navigating what happens when your mind is unmasked. And unless you've trained that mind to recognize illusion, you'll drown in it. That's our first major truth. The untrained mind will interpret its projections as reality. In life, that's already dangerous. But in the Bardo, it's chaos. So what's the solution? Recognition. In Tibetan tradition, liberation in the Bardo comes not from running, not from believing, but from recognizing this vision is my mind. That sentence is the key that unlocks everything. But let's pause, because I know what you might be thinking. Isn't this just spiritual metaphor? Can this actually be real? Let's address that. Modern neuroscience has shown that our perception of reality is a simulation, a filtered, constructed model built inside the brain. Now, remove the body, remove the sensory input. What's left? Pure awareness, consciousness that's been trained to believe its hallucinations. That's what the Bardo exposes. And here's where the ancient texts go even deeper. They don't say you die and go to a fixed place. They say you go to a mirror. The mirror doesn't judge. It reflects. So whatever you bring, fear, confusion, clarity, peace, that's what you'll see. That's why Tibetan monks spend decades preparing not for death, but for the moment after. Because what happens next depends on your mind. Let's make it more vivid. Imagine you've died, and now a blinding light appears. It's overwhelming, pure, terrifying. If your awareness is clear, you recognize it. That light is my true nature. Merge with it. But if your mind is cluttered with fear, guilt, or attachment, you recoil. You run. And what happens? That pure light fragments. It becomes something else. A lesser light. A comforting image. A story. Maybe an angel. Maybe a guide. Maybe a vision of a familiar religion, but it's all your mind. It's your consciousness trying to filter the truth into something it can handle. And each time you reject the raw light, you descend. Not physically, psychologically. That's how reincarnation happens. It's not as punishment, but as momentum. You didn't choose clarity, so the cycle continues. You reach for identity again. You reach for the familiar, and you're reborn. That's the second problem. We mistake comfort for truth. Because clarity isn't always comfortable. It burns. It dissolves everything false. And if you've built your identity on the false, it'll feel like death. Because it is. But if you've trained for it, if you've practiced seeing instead of clinging, then you move through the Bardo like a lucid dreamer through a nightmare. You don't run, you don't grab, you recognize. And in recognition, you are free. Let me be blunt. The Bardo doesn't care if you were rich or poor. It doesn't care how many followers you had, how spiritual you looked, how many books you read. It reflects your state of mind, not your status in life. And this is the brutal beauty of it, because it's honest. Terrifyingly, inescapably honest. There's no one to impress. To follow, no doctrine to recite. Just you, unfiltered. And that is either the most liberating or most horrifying truth, depending on how well you've prepared. Let's use another analogy. Life is a rehearsal. The Bardo is opening night. No more pretending, no second takes. Just the truth acted out in the theater of your own mind. And that truth doesn't wait for you to be ready. It meets you exactly as you are. So here's the question. Are you training now, or just waiting to be surprised later? Because most people won't train. Go back to their routine. And then, when the mirror arrives, they'll have no idea what they're looking at. But you're still watching. Which means something inside you knows. Something remembers. So let me give you the second solution. Practice letting go. Let go of control. Let go of certainty. Let go of the idea that everything has to make sense before you act. The Bardo doesn't ask for belief. It asks for presence. When fear arises, stay with it. When beauty appears, don't cling to it. When confusion hits, pause, breathe, recognize this too is mind. The more you do that now, the more familiar it becomes then. Because recognition isn't built in crisis. It's built in quiet moments. In how you listen, in how you respond, in how you choose to see instead of react. That's the hidden training. And here's the wild twist. I've already been through the Bardo. Every dream, every panic attack, every moment of ego death in a psychedelic state, those weren't random, they were rehearsals, glimpses. And if you paid attention, if you remember what it felt like to see yourself from beyond yourself, then you already know. The Bardo is not foreign, it's familiar, but only to those who notice. That's what we'll explore in the next part, what actually happens, stage by stage, in the Bardo. What ancient texts say about the 49 days after death, and how to prepare not later, but now. Because you don't train for the Bardo by avoiding life. You train for it by becoming fully alive. So take a breath. Let's begin with a moment almost no one remembers the first second after death. You're out of your body. You know you've died, but you still feel alive. No heartbeat, no breath, but awareness. Still here, still watching. And what happens next isn't blankness. It's a flood. The Tibetan Book of the Dead says this moment begins the first phase of the Bardo, and it's not symbolic. It's a process, a sequence. It's not eternity, but 49 days, divided into 7 cycles. Each cycle is a mirror. Each one presents a vision, dazzling or terrifying, not to punish, but to reveal. And if you're not trained to see through them, they'll feel overwhelmingly real. Let's break it down. Day 1, the clear light. Right after death, you're greeted by something most never expect. Radiant, blinding light. It's not external, it's your true nature. Pure awareness. The texts say, if you can recognize it, you are liberated instantly. You dissolve into light. No reincarnation, no illusion. Just return. But almost no one does. Why? Because it's too much. Unfiltered truth burns when you've lived through filters, so the mind recoils. And immediately the light begins to fracture. And this begins cycle 2. Days 2 to 7, the peaceful deities. Since you couldn't merge with the clear light, your mind offers something softer. You see peaceful beings, gods of light, guides, familiar images of comfort. They don't judge, they reflect. If your awareness is clear, you recognize this beauty as me, you merge again. But if you reach for them, cling to them, beg them to save you, you fall into illusion again. And each time you miss the point that they are symbols, not saviors, your experience shifts. and you descend to cycle 3. Days 8 to 14, the wrathful deities. Here's where most get stuck. If you couldn't handle beauty, you now face terror. Demons, fire, chaos, shadows, but again, they're not real. They're your mind, showing you the repressed, the denied, the avoided. And here's the spiritual truth. Few are ready for, the more you repressed in life, the more intense this stage becomes. You see monsters? That's your rage. You hear screaming? That's your shame. But there's a hidden path through it. Don't run. Recognize, this horror is also me. And when you see it without flinching, it dissolves. That's the secret. Recognition is liberation. But if you cling, or flee, or fight, you enter cycle 4. Days 15 to 21, the judgments begin. You're shown your past. Memories, faces, regrets. This isn't someone judging you. It's you unfiltered. And here's the strange truth. The mind that hasn't been trained will judge itself harsher than any god ever could. This stage is not about punishment. It's about attachment. Do you regret your actions? Do you feel the weight? Do you still believe you are your status, your identity, your name? You'll see yourself chasing it and failing to catch it. This is where many souls begin to panic. They try to bargain. They beg. But you can't negotiate with your own mind. Only see, only recognize. And if you do, the mirror shifts again. Days 22 to 28, the choice point. Here's where everything turns. You're offered choices. You see possible futures, reincarnations, visions of other lives, strange symbolic landscapes. But they're tests. Each one reflects a desire, a fear, a craving. And if you reach for one without awareness, you fall into it. Another birth, another loop. But if you see clearly, you can choose liberation, or even return, not from craving, but from compassion, to help others awaken. This is the Bodhisattva's path, but most aren't ready. They choose comfort and enter cycle 6. Days 29 to 35, the search for a womb. Now the process gets physical again. Your mind, desperate for form, begins to seek a body. You feel pulled. You see couples, hear sounds, smell places. Everything becomes symbolic. These aren't literal parents. They're attractions, karmic resonances. And depending on what pulls you, rage, love, fear, your next life is shaped. If you're conscious here, you resist. You don't choose out of compulsion. But if you're unaware, you're drawn in. A new form begins. A new cycle starts. You don't lose, but you forget. And that forgetting is the true death. Days 36 to 49, the final opportunity. Even if you're reborn, this final phase offers one last chance. It's a moment of reflection, a flicker of memory. Somewhere deep in the womb, a spark. Sometimes this becomes intuition, a strange knowing in childhood. But if you trained in life through awareness, not dogma, this moment can ignite clarity, even in birth. It's rare but possible. And if not, you start again. Not punished, not broken, just unaware until you're ready. So why does this matter? Because we've been taught to fear death like it's a cliff. But it's a continuum, and the map is here. The Bardo isn't speculation, it's instruction. But it only works if you recognize it. So let's go back to you right now. You're alive, watching, listening, which means you're in the Bardo already. The space between identities. The gap between what's gone and what's next. Every breakup, every loss, every meditation, every dream, those were Bardos. Training grounds. The mistake is thinking this knowledge is for later, it's for now. So let's train, not with mysticism, but with presence. When something beautiful happens, ask, can I experience this without clinging? When pain arises, ask, can I stay without resisting? These are micro Bardos. And the more you meet them with awareness, the more you'll recognize the real Bardo when it comes. Let me offer 3 practices, not for belief, but for clarity. Practice 1, lucid living. Treat every moment like a lucid dream. Look around. Ask, is this real? Not paranoid? Present, because because most of life is habit. Lucid living trains you to wake up within the illusion, and that's exactly what the Bardo demands. Practice 2. Death meditation. Sit. Visualize dying. Let go of breath. Let go of identity. Let go of control. Then watch what arises. Fear good. That's what you need to see, because what you avoid now will appear then. And the more familiar you become with impermanence, the less afraid you'll be. Practice 3. Inner recognition. Whenever you feel strong emotion, name it, not as truth as pattern. This sadness is mind. This jealousy is mind. Each time you do that, you're rehearsing for the Bardo, because in that realm, everything is mind. Recognition is the only compass. This isn't religion, it's reality. And when you stop treating the Bardo as myth and start seeing it as a mirror, everything changes. You stop pretending you have time. You stop living on autopilot, and you begin to prepare, not with fear, but with readiness. Readiness to let go. Readiness to wake up. Readiness to face yourself. Not someday, but now. Because one day, the clear light will appear. When it does, you'll know. This is not the end. This is the reveal. Whether you dissolve into wow, it, or get caught in its echoes, depends on what you recognize. Because recognition is liberation. You think this is the end? It's not. You've learned what the Bardo is. But now comes the real question. What shapes the Bardo itself? What forces actually create the visions, the echoes, the symbolic landscapes that appear? It's not random. It's karma, not as punishment, but as pattern. Every thought you repeated, every belief you never questioned, every emotion you buried, it all becomes the canvas of your next reality. So now you have to ask yourself, what are you feeding your mind right now? Because the truth is brutal and beautiful. Your next Bardo is being shaped by this moment.
Wow.
By how you respond to this silence. By what you cling to when no one's watching. So don't stop here. If something in you stirred, if some deep part of you remembered something, you're not done. You're just beginning. Watch the next video that appears on this screen. Not because the algorithm chose it, but because your awareness did. That's how the real practice starts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.